Sound of Metal is a 6-time Academy Award nominated film which dropped on Amazon this week about a drummer who loses his hearing and his life is thrown to free fall as a result. The film stars Ahmed, who's been Oscar nominated for his performance, and I gotta say, after watching this movie just last night, I don't get the hype. I really don't. Now, this is a movie I was really looking forward to. I'd heard great things about it. The marketing for the movie very much shows the drumming aspect of the movie, and that plays out after the first 15 minutes. This isn't a music-based movie, and that's a minor thing. As I said at the very beginning, 6 Academy Award nominations for this movie, including Best Picture, Best Actor, Best Supporting Actor, Best Editing, Best Sound Design, and Best Screenplay. That's a lot of awards. So clearly the critics think I'm wrong. And Rotten Tomatoes, it's also got over 90% on both critics score and audience score. So again, Rotten Tomatoes thinks I'm wrong. So maybe I'm going against the grain on this one. But for me, this movie, it's nothing special, and that's a major disappointment because, as I say, I was really looking forward to this movie. Maybe my expectations were a little bit too high. Now, the story is about the drummer who loses his hearing, and initially he tries to hide it and just get on with life and play drums, but he realizes he's got to do something. So he goes to a pharmacy or a chemist, and they send him off to a doctor, and the doctor does some tests and reveals his hearing is screwed. There's a nice little nod to Spinal Tap where the doctor even says to him, I could turn this up to 11 and you wouldn't hear anything. I really like that line. But Riz Ahmed at the start shows a good job of, he's kind of gone through the stages of grief almost at the loss of it. He's in denial, he's got anger, he's got various different stages of denial in there. And it's very much a case where his hearing just one day just goes. Just at a drop of a hat, a drop of a pin, it just goes away. Which is terrifying, the thought of that happening to anybody. Your world would be completely shattered, and they kind of show his path throughout the movie of having to adapt to that. Like he has to learn sign language and all that, we'll get into that later on. The weird thing I found at the start of the movie is he loses his hearing. Now, for me, as someone who studied sound before, and I'm not an expert, I'm not an audiologist or a doctor or a medical person involved with ears, but I would assume if someone loses their hearing like that, one thing they'd miss massively, or one thing they'd struggle with, is the volume of their voice when they're speaking. Hearing yourself impacts heavily on the volume you speak. For example, if you're on the phone, you might speak a little bit louder because you actually hear a feedback of yourself on the phone and you think you need to be louder than you actually do. So when someone loses their hearing completely, there's a good chance that when they're trying to speak to someone, it'd either be too loud or too quiet. You know, it's like if you're wearing noise cancelling headphones, there's nothing playing through them, but you try talking to someone, you'll be worried about whether they can hear you or not because you can't hear how you sound. And that's not the case with the actor in this movie. When he loses hearing, he's just able to speak perfectly all the time. No volume changes in his voice. His voice is always at a normal level. He's not shouting, he's not under speaking. Those seem to be like a minor thing. You know, I'm sure the filmmakers did all their research with audiologists or doctors about this. So maybe I'm just talking rubbish here, but that definitely seems to be a thing based on my experience with sound down the years, that there would be differences in his voice throughout the movie as he adapts to learning how to be deaf. As he gets more used to being deaf, his voice would normalize a bit more, but the sudden impact of losing his hearing should have impacts on the way he speaks, and that isn't the case in this movie, which I would say is bad sound design, but this has been nominated for good sound design, although I can see later on why that is the case. Now, the reason it's been nominated for best sound design, why people are going on about, oh, this movie's got amazing sound, is because when he loses his hearing, at various points throughout the movie, we hear the world from the perspective of the protagonist. When people are talking, you hear them muffled and hard to hear. But what I'd argue at that point is that if this movie didn't have that in it, it would be stupid. So that is something that they had to have in the movie. So saying the sound is amazing is perhaps over the top because that sound is essential for the movie, because the movie wouldn't work without that sound in it. And you're probably saying, but you're saying the movie wouldn't work without that sound, but I'm saying that sound is a natural consequence of the movie. It's not because someone said, oh, you know, it would sound amazing if we did this. I wouldn't say it's clever sound design, I would say it's necessary sound design. Although later on in the movie, spoiler alert here, later on in the movie, when he gets his implant and he's expecting to have perfect sound and the implant's turned on and the sound is very metallic, that's good sound design in my opinion, because it shows the impact of the implants and how they're not 100% perfect. It was one of the best moments in the movie, in a bad way, when his world comes shattering down. He thought this was going to be the be all and end all of it, and it doesn't quite work out. And then when he's going to learn sign language, they show that he doesn't know sign language. Then he's starting to learn sign language, and 2 scenes later, he's fully fluent. Now, this is a personal interest story. It's about a person losing a key aspect of their life and how they rebuild their life. Sure, it's not a conventional movie. It's not an action-packed movie. It's not a thrill ride. It's not got car chases and explosions, and it doesn't need to. But it does need to have a solid story behind it, and I'm sure people will claim that it does. I would claim that it doesn't, because this movie does not have an ending. We'll get into that later on. But the main thing that I didn't like this movie for was it just super drags. It's super slow-paced. It's long, there's stuff in there just as filler, and overall the story is weak. Now, it's an interesting idea, but it seems clear to me that the filmmakers had a key idea about this guy, this drummer, whose life revolves around music and his relationship revolves around his music, and he suddenly loses hearing, therefore losing that key part of his life. But where does that go? The answer is nowhere. So Ruben starts out, as I say, being a drummer. The music's kind of crappy, you gotta admit, at the start. He loses his hearing suddenly. Then he's going through the stages of grief at the loss of his hearing. Then his girlfriend sends him off to this camp thing for deaf people. Then the stuff at the rehab camp is where the core of the movie is, because that's where he's learning to be deaf, and he's interacting with these interesting people and learning to live his new life. But then he gets his implant after selling all his stuff. Then the implant isn't quite working, but he meets up with his former girlfriend in Paris. Then after a party, I think he's just disappointed with his implant and he leaves, and then he's sitting outside, turns it off, and the movie ends. There was some spoilers in there, so spoiler alert, but that's the core of the movie. Now I can see where the Oscar nominations came from this movie. Riz Ahmed puts in a very strong performance within the movie, and you can see the work he put into this role in terms of learning sign language and learning how to interact with the world without being able to hear the world. And he makes you empathize with that character pretty strongly. Then you got Paul Raci, who plays Joe, who's like the leader of the rehab place, and his performance is really strong, ultimately boiling down to a scene between Ruben and Joe after Ruben's gotten his implant, and he shows Joe that he's had surgery, and Joe ultimately tells him to leave. That is the scene within this movie, which is the Oscar nominated scene, I believe. Every movie that's Oscar nominated has at least one scene in it that makes you go, yeah, that's why those actors are fantastic. In Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, it was the scene with Chadwick Boseman giving his monologue about what happened to his mother when he was younger. And similarly in this one, this is the scene when Ruben shows Joe he's had his implant, and Joe kind of loses it and isn't happy with him and tells him to leave, tells him to get out. Both actors in that scene had a strong chemistry, showed good emotion throughout the scene, and overall showed good performances between the two. And the other scene, which I've already referenced, which I think is a good scene, is when his implant is activated weeks later and he doesn't get the results he was hoping for. You really empathize with Riz Ahmed when it suddenly clicks with him that the implant isn't magic, it's not going to restore his hearing fully. But then we get to the ending when he's sitting outside and he can hear things and he can hear bells chiming, and ultimately it all comes in on top of him and he's not liking what he hears, so he turns off his implant and there's silence. Now this is obviously foreshadowed earlier from when he's talking to Joe in the rehab place, in that scene I mentioned, the Academy Award nominated scene, I guess. That scene, Ruben talks to him about when you were in that room writing, did you ever find stillness? Because that's where he believes heaven is. Ruben's clearly saying no, but at the end, I believe the thought process is Ruben finds stillness when he takes off his implant and has just silence. But it leads to the end of the movie being an actor sitting there in silence for 10-15 seconds, just staring off, complete silence, cut to black. Now I get that they're trying to be smart with it, be clever with it, be like, oh, he found stillness at the end in his disability, but ultimately it leads to the movie being a road to nowhere. So the main reasons why I didn't like this movie: the pacing was really slow. Overall, the movie was too long and stretched out beyond what it needed to be. Perhaps half an hour of this movie could be taken out, maybe even more. Overall, the story, as I say, is a road to nothing. While not every movie needs a beginning, middle, and end, the majority of them should have that, this movie has a beginning, a little bit of a middle, and then just fizzles out to the point where they didn't even have an end goal for the character. You could argue his end goal was to get his hearing back, but that's a stupid end goal. Just is. But on top of that, I fully am aware that my expectations of this movie might have been what led me to dislike this movie as much as I did. But I desperately out there want to hear from people about what they thought of Sound of Metal. I'm sure there's plenty of people out there who are going to think I'm a complete idiot for not liking this movie, but I just don't get the hype. Sound of Metal, interesting idea, good actors, poor execution. For me, a 4 out of 10 movie. So there we go, folks. Sound of Metal. I wasn't a big fan of it. Let me know your thoughts on the movie. And if you got time, I'd really appreciate if you check out some of the other videos on our channel. There should be a video right over here for you to check out. And if you like what you see, hit that subscribe button for new content every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Throw in there some other times as well. With all that said and done, thank you so much for watching.